People came on the break and asked where they are. So they're in forestry room 101. It's upstairs in the forestry, or sometimes it's called the SRES building. There's some confusion on the AMU about what it is now. It's a building just across there where you, the front office, the plenary is, and the tutorials are upstairs. So if you go into the main entrance, you'll see a wooden elephant with mouse. Go up the stairs, walk straight ahead, you're walking to the tutorial room. And as I said, make sure you look at the web page, and as I said, the learning portfolio, the assessment criteria are there. I can see how many people are accessing the web page, and most of you are using it lots. There's one person who's used it over 76 times already. Some people haven't looked at it at all, so rather than ask Luke or I what the assessment criteria is, please make sure you just use the web page.
I'll continue probably another 15 to 20 minutes, which will then allow a lot of time for discussion. So as we went into the break, I was talking about some of the very rapid biological and geophysical changes which are occurring to the Earth now. And we have increasingly good evidence that these are largely driven by human activities. But these aren't the only things that are happening around the planet. Is that the human enterprise itself is not at all standing still. There are a lot of important changes that we need to understand in our part of the Earth system as well. And this is one you hear about a lot. It's the so-called peak oil issue. This looks like a complicated diagram, but I think it's one of the best ways to describe not only the peak oil issue, but the geopolitical issue of where the oil is and who's using it. There are two circles here. The outer circle is the red circle, and that's the estimated amount of oil that various countries have. The bigger the circle, the more oil it has. There's Saudi Arabia right there. But people forget that the U.S. was as big as Saudi Arabia in terms of the amount of oil it had. The black one is how much is left. So you see, if you look at the areas of black and the areas of red in your mind, you can probably see that they pretty much balance out, which means that we're close to peak oil. We've probably reached the maximum, or close to it, that we can produce. Because remember, the bits that are remaining, the black, except in these Middle Eastern areas, these are much, much harder to get at, because you leave the most difficult oil to the last. It makes a lot of economic sense. So here we have a graphical representation of the peak oil issue. Is that demand globally is skyrocketing, and yet supplies are obviously limited. But it also tells you the geopolitics, in that the biggest users are here and in Europe and perhaps in Japan, but they have very little oil left. Most of the oil, most of the black bits are around in the Middle East, former Soviet Union, but then Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. So it's not at all hard to understand the geopolitical tension between those parts of the world. But there's some other interesting, perhaps more subtle things that are happening, which I think are really fascinating. And that's how different states, or parts of states, are actually moving through this hierarchy, if you like, of pre-modern states, which would mainly be African states, but also the poorest people in China and India, up to what we call modern states, which are the classical nation state of 50 years or so ago. And examples of this would be Brazil, Egypt, Russia, now Syria, parts of India and China. But the interesting thing is that as countries move from there to there, they're also floating from there into what we call the globalizing community. The one that's tightly networked and linked, the one that you know about, because you can get on the internet. The internet is a feature of this world and not so much of that and that world. So as you move up, you go into a world that's increasingly connected through information, through culture, through finance, through travel, and so on. And here you see the classical globalizing communities, US, here you see Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, Western Europe, Taiwan, etc. And now the top 10 or 15% of China and India are in that group as well. Population-wise, over half the population of the Earth, and people forget this, is not globalized. It's in the so-called pre-modern societies. We only have about 20% of the Earth's population is what we call in the globalized part of the world. But the top bit, to me, is even more fascinating. There's estimated 1% who are actually moving beyond nation states, or even beyond globalized nation states. And their main allegiance is not to a country, it's to a multinational company, like Exxon or Daimler Chrysler or Mitsubishi. And you may say, well, this sounds a bit strange because we all belong to countries. But having gone to a meeting of the petroleum industry, and having sat around and had teas and coffees and dinners with these people, it is really interesting. All sorts of different accents and ways of speaking, but they all talk about Exxon or Shell as if it's their common country. And that seems to be the most important part of their life. And they move around, but all within the company framework. So this is about 1% of the world's population, people think now, and it's growing. So this is a new trend, which in the long term may really change about how we think about nation states, cultures, societies, and so on. But the point is, when you look to the future, you get very different views depending on people's perspectives and backgrounds, where they come from. You get these people who see a lot of violence and tension and conflict with terrorism and so on, clash of civilizations and so on. Then you see the end of history, people who say, forget about what we did in the past, it's all new, market world, new global age, cybertopia, all this sort of thing. Then you see the people who are more interested in integrating more with the environment, our common future, ecologically driven, regional stewardship, and so on. So what you see is an incredible variety of perspectives. And this is why it's really hard to get anything near a common future for the 6.4 billion of us on the planet. Because the desired futures of these people are quite different, often in conflict. And so it leads to conflicts like this. This is a few years old now, but it still is a very good, simple analogy of whose world really is it. There's the WTO world of the businessmen who see the world as something that could be made a lot more efficient if we just broke down barriers. But then you have other people who say, no, there's a biophysical world out there that we have to live with, and WTO may create even more pressure and damage to the biophysical world. So you get these huge battles, conceptual, philosophical battles about the planet and how we're going to live on the planet. So a group of us who were studying this issue of the Anthropocene made a very simple statement. I think it's very powerful. We begin the 21st century in a very volatile world. There is no clear way forward. There is no clear future. This is the world that you're coming into now, into your adult life. So this is the world you're inheriting. It'll be interesting to see, in a way, how you make your way through this. So I'll conclude now with a few comments about this issue, sustainability or collapse. We're increasingly globalized. Will we, as a whole global society, end up reaching sustainability, or will we all collapse, or will it happen on a regional basis? Where really are we going? So what can we learn from the previous analysis of the lecture about where we might be going? Well, the first thing is you can't really predict the future. And this actually frustrates a lot of physical scientists, climate scientists, and so on. They still talk about predictability. But there are problems there. First of all, the climate's a chaotic system, and I don't think you can predict it anyway, even if you precisely knew the CO2 level. But second of all, you can't predict that because that depends on human behavior and institutions, cultures, and so on. The best we can do, and I think a very powerful way to go forward, is to do it the other way, to develop scenarios. What type of worlds could we have? What type of worlds do we want to have? And then backcast as to how we get there. And the best example of this is a thing called the Millennium Assessment. That's what that MA is up there. And they developed a number of scenarios. I'll put the four main ones up there. You can see how different they are. One is a global orchestration one, and that's pretty much partly where we're going now. A globally connected society that focuses on trade, economic liberalization, but it takes a reactive approach to environmental problems. It doesn't anticipate them. It waits till they happen, and it says, oh, we got some wealth, we can do something about it. Then there's the order from strength one. This is not a very nice one. We break up into regionalized and fragmented world, concerned with security and protection, putting up walls around countries to keep other people out, emphasizing regional markets, paying little attention to public goods. Almost everything is privatized, and again, taking a reactive approach to environmental problems. You can see some elements of this one in our world as well. Then there are other ways. This is the one that is a more green future, if you like, is called the adapting mosaic. And it's really a fascinating one because it talks about regional watershed scale ecosystems. And you see elements of it in Australia with the catchment authorities and so on. That's actually an attempt to go towards this model. Local institutions are strengthened and local ecosystem management strategies are common. Interestingly, it's proactive management. It tries to anticipate environmental problems and deal with them before they happen or before they become worse. This is an interesting variant. This is the so-called techno garden, where you're also proactive. You try to deal with environmental problems before they